Next on Rugby Wrap-Up, George Hook, Steve Lewis, and Matt McCarthy whine, moan, and complain through an exceptional Autumn Rugby Spectacular. Rugby Wrap-Up brought to you in part by The Pig and Whistle, the world's best rugby pub. The Murphy Kennedy Group, founded with the idea that construction can be done better. And Lean and Limber, stretching your way to a healthier lifestyle. Hey everybody, and welcome back to Rugby Wrap-Up. Matt McCarthy in Midtown Manhattan. Thank you once again for joining us. Again, we are joined by some of the heavyweights in the global rugby pundit world. Mr. Stephen Lewis calling in from the Upper West Side of Manhattan, and Mr. George Hook, I believe, calling in from Dublin again. Is that accurate, George?
Yeah, absolutely. Golf is back on the market for the last week in Ireland. So we're all out playing golf, despite cold weather, which, in New York you'd probably consider quite reasonable, but we think it's pretty cold.
Is that your lame excuse for not wearing a jacket and a collared shirt?
That is my lame excuse.
Okay, all right. Stephen, meanwhile, you're looking a little bit more dapper than your slob self usually.
Well, I felt if you dish it out, you're going to be able to take it. So given your past sartorial indiscretions, I thought I'd up the ante today and get a suit back on. Fair
play. All right, guys, before we get to the nitty-gritty of what we're talking about today, the Autumn Rugby, the Autumn Internationals, Tri-Nations, Autumn Nations Cup, we had some significant rugby played here on American soil. And, Stephen, because you're the reigning two-time USA Rugby Coach of the Year, as everyone is so sick of hearing, we thought we'd have you briefly bring us up to speed.
Yeah, a couple of big things in the domestic USA games. So at Chula Vista in California over the weekend, both the men's and women's sevens programs got on the field and had live contact, unfortunately only within themselves. But good for Mike Friday, Chris Brown, all those men, all those women to actually get out there and get going again. Probably the only dark spot was Pat Blair's commentary. In other news, of course, the MLR 2021 schedule came out this week. So it's a March 20th start for Major League Rugby in season 4.
You're going to see Pat Blair anytime soon?
He's got my number. I've got his.
All right, fair enough. George, Steve's taking a shot at a fellow pundit, former player. Not that you've had any experience doing
that. No, I think taking a pot is part and parcel of what we do. And the actual sort of punditry would be at a loss if people weren't taking shots. I mean, just if you don't mind me waxing about something that I take quite seriously, is certainly now in Britain and Ireland, political correctness has reached a point where nobody is prepared to actually say anything. And for Rugby Wrap-Up, not because of the two of us, but Rugby Wrap-Up is at a crucial point, I think, in rugby's life, when it has to talk about the things that are important. Otherwise, you become, the program becomes, and other programs become, the worst word you can possibly use, irrelevant. And Steve and I aren't going to allow you to be irrelevant, because we're going to kick the living SH1T out of anybody around the place.
Let's do that. Let's do just that right now. And I appreciate you coming and throwing me that life preserver at me. But before we get to the Autumn Nations Cup and the Tri-Nations Cup, one thing that piqued your interest, caught your eye on the global rugby landscape that is not necessarily related to the Autumn Internationals. Stephen?
Yeah, something else that annoyed me, you mean?
Yeah,
it's the 2023 Rugby World Cup draw for France. Is coming up next week, Monday, December 14th. And what vexes me about this particular thing is the time at which they solidified the seedings. So World Rugby, in their infinite wisdom, locked the seedings in on the 1st of January this past year. It ignores everything that has occurred from the 1st of January up till now, and it has significant benefits for certain teams, and other teams obviously got shafted. So, who did well? Wales in band 1, currently languishing at 9th. They're in the first band. Japan haven't played a game. They're in the second band. They're placed at the top table, solidified with a backroom deal with Beaumont, and that's why they're there. Who's hard done by? On form, Scotland and Argentina, who are currently 7th and 8th, but are both in the 3rd tier. And what that means, with 4 groups of 5, 2 going through, somebody's going to be unhappy.
Well, George, at least we got Beaumont making a backroom deal with a tier 2 nation, so to speak, in Japan.
Well, I suppose it makes a difference between, making a deal for having a murderer support him in his quest for the presidency of WRC. Like you did, the words infinite wisdom and world rugby don't actually go in the same sentence. It's a bit like military intelligence. They just don't go together. And the world rugby is, there's a danger here that might sound dramatic. But as
Go ahead.
No, but as I speak to you, everything I have worried about for the last decade or more is coming true. We now know that something like 70 former rugby players are about to take actions against their respective unions for brain damage occasioned by concussion, occasioned by playing rugby. You as an American know very well what happened in the NFL. We saw the movie. We know all that. But we've known about this. We have known what we are doing to men, women, and children for the last 10 years. We've known. And particularly Beaumont, and I hold Beaumont hugely responsible. He has poo-pooed this in every interview. I saw an interview with John Beattie of Scottish television, the former Scottish number 8. And Beattie was so upset at Beaumont's just dismissing of the Brelin. And now they are reaping the whirlwind. And let me tell you what the whirlwind is. Doesn't matter whether it's $1 billion or 10 billion. It's not the money. It is what it will do to the game. There's a moment in the movie Concussion where the NFL guy says to the doctor, he says, but if you're right, no kids are going to play our game. We are already looking at it, particularly in New Zealand. Can you imagine that there are kids in New Zealand not playing rugby? I mean, they don't do anything else. And you are now looking at, first and foremost, apart from all the other things, there is nothing good. You said, we're going to talk about the good stuff. There's no good stuff.
Well, I didn't say we were going to talk about the good stuff. I said we were going to talk about it.
The game is in peril. The game is awful. And in a minute, Steve's going to be talking about how awful it is. The game is awful. Like when you talk about the final and England, it is awful.
All right, we're jumping ahead. Hold on. As somebody that's had a bunch of concussions and somebody that's been knocked out 6 times, I fully get the concussion thing, but we have come a long way from 10 to 15 years ago where we're actually acknowledging it.
No, we have not.
Yes, we have.
No, you're living with Judy Garland and the Wizard of Oz. You're living so far out of reality, not true. Let's look. Maybe
it's because I've had so many concussions.
Let's look at this weekend. In all the games, there were hits to the head unpunished. Not a single red card for hits to the head by fora. Not one. The referees have copped out. So if the referees have copped out, it means it's the equivalent that you can't walk down Fifth Avenue because the cops are not patrolling the street. And that's what's happened in rugby now. This is, and I'm taking Steve's time and I'm sorry, but this is a disaster. We are now looking at the end. And the great thing is that there is a silver bullet.
Oh, that's a cliffhanger for next week, the silver bullet explanation. But I can't agree with you fully on this. I understand it's a major issue. I understand that it's scaring parents and kids away. But I am saying it's 100% better from, say, when I was 25 and playing and getting knocked silly and everybody's saying, oh, just, you got your bell rung, get back in there, and giggling about it, right? It's a whole different animal now. Everybody is paying attention to it at least. And I'm saying that's an improvement in itself. But we got to get to where we're going with the show, right? Because we've got to wrap up the autumn rugby competitions. We have the Autumn Nations Cup, and we have the Tri-Nations Rugby, which we're going to start with. Australia and Los Pumas. And why don't we begin with the Los Pumas, the UAR, rescinding punishment. George, is Argentina serious about racism?
This guy wrote that tweet, the Argentinian captain. He was 19 years of age or thereabouts, coming from a broken family, an extremely difficult position. If there wasn't tweets around when I was 19, but if somebody started resuscitating some of the stuff I might have said when I was 19 and
20.
then tried to apply to me today, then, you know, it could be very difficult. So let's get it clear. There's nobody on this program is supporting racism. There's nobody on this program would dream of using the N-word. There's all those things. Take all those for granted. But my problem is that what the union did, the Argentinian union did, whatever about our sympathies for the man, what the Argentinian union did by suspending him and not suspending him. That's the actual problem. They sent a huge message out there that no, we're not really terribly serious. Either you suspend him and then he's gone and he's not the captain and he serves his sentence. But you don't, whatever the word is, you hop from one side to the other. And that's where the Argentinian union, I think, stands indicted.
Well, I agree with George. None of us would want to be judged on our behavior in past lives or as a younger man. And Hugo Monye, well-known English winger, has made a fairly impassioned couple of interviews about this topic. But the fault lies here in the main with the union, who did the correct thing initially by flagging this, suspending the players, taking appropriate action for what is inappropriate behavior. However, their inexplicable U-turn 48 hours later on the back purportedly of a player revolt, the players were threatening a strike. Their U-turn as a union is shameful. The only good thing that came out of it, in my opinion, reading between the lines, is the coach, Mario Ledesma. So these players were then unsuspended, as it were, and they were available to him for selection for that game, and he didn't pick them. Very wisely, in my opinion. So he's probably the only person coming out of this untainted, shall we say. But a black day for Argentine rugby. Black day.
Yeah, you had, from a media perspective, we're all media guys. You had a difficult situation and then rescinding the punishment just threw oil on the fire. Then everybody just started going. And now the kid, he's not a kid, he's 27, is being asked questions in terms of, well, how have you changed? What are you doing to prove that you've changed? Getting to the Australia side of this, 2 ties on home soil, 2 draws. Couldn't it be worse?
Well, I think it was in one of the recent programs. I made the point that Australian rugby is on life support anyway. It's competing with rules, with soccer, with rugby league, particularly with rugby league. I mean, I remember being down there for a Lions tour in Australia, and I picked up the paper to read about the Lions tour. I couldn't find it. That test match, they were talking about something called the State of Origin, which is some rugby league game or something. I mean, it's
a pretty big deal.
Yeah, for them it is, of course. Yeah. So they've always been in a difficult position, but they got over it because of the private schools, incredibly good coaching and great captains, wonderful individual players, all that sort of stuff. They don't have great players now. They don't actually have a strong base, and they don't have any money.
Steve, any positives taken for the Wallabies?
Yeah, they beat New Zealand. They have a new coach. They've actually quite a good coaching crew that they've installed, and those guys have been able to blood players. So I don't see it as all doom and gloom like you guys do. I mean, I understand the financial and the context and the background. George is correct on all of that, but I don't think they're at the. I don't think they're at the bottom.
Up north, Steve, your buddy, Eddie O'Sullivan, lit into your fellow Scots, Greg Townsend and Stu Hogg. I'm on good terms with those guys, so I use that version of their names.
Mm-hmm.
Any thoughts on that, Steve? Because I know your head was exploding off camera.
No, I mean, everyone knows Eddie O'Sullivan here. He's the most unpopular man in European rugby. But
George, I thought that was you.
No, Eddie's the most unpopular man in world rugby, not European rugby.
Okay. So, but unfortunately, what he said had a kernel of truth. So as a special breed of masochist, I am, okay? The Scottish sporting fan. I have been, witness to many a false dawn. And here we go again. So for, Townsend and Hogg to harumph and say, oh, we're in control of the game. I mean, O'Sullivan's got a point. They weren't in control of the game for anything other than the first 20 minutes. So for Scotland, here we go again. 2 steps forward, 1 step back. So there is some truth to Mr. O'Sullivan's comments, however unpleasantly he expresses them.
And for the folks at home that don't know this, Eddie O'Sullivan was both the head coach for Ireland and the head coach for Team USA. George, you share that coaching lineage with him, in that you coached Ireland's women's team, and you were part of the coaching staff for Team USA. Did the Irish performance give Irish fans and a George Hook hope for the future?
I honestly don't know. I really don't. I mean, if you play 4 games or whatever, or in Ireland's case, if you take the whole year of Coach Farrell's stewardship, and they play rubbish for almost the entire time, and then suddenly they have one good game. Like, I wasn't the guy who dreamt up the phrase, one swallow doesn't make a summer. So you have to question, like, this is one game against what I think was Scotland's worst performance probably in the year. Does that immediately make us good? I don't think so. We have a fullback who can't spell defence. We have an inside centre that a 5th-rate centre that we recruited from New Zealand who can't pass the ball. We have a slow scrum half. We've got a lot of problems.
On that note, let's take a quick commercial break and we'll be right back.
Been blind since I was 4. And I've never seen a beer commercial or a beer label. None of that stuff influences me. I drink beer because of the taste. And my beer is Pabst Blue Ribbon. It has the taste and the flavor.
What do you think's on the label?
I think there's a naked woman riding on a unicorn, jumping over fire. Oh, that's good beer.
If you're in New York City and want to watch some great rugby, have some great food, and some great times, go to the world's best rugby pub, the Pig and Whistle on West 36th Street.
And we are back with Mr. George Hook calling in from Ireland, Mr. Stephen Lewis. We finally got to see the Flying Fijians play, and they played a team with a completely different style in Georgia, and we had some exciting rugby played.
Fiji played some vivacious rugby. Tries left, right, and center, both wings. What impresses there is, given their inactivity, this is the first run out under Vern Cotter. Definitely some structure. It wasn't just, magic tricks the whole time. There was a purpose to it. And so to me, there's some serious light at the end of the tunnel. That could be an interesting team to follow, to track over the next 18 months. That having been said, Georgia are a limited team. Did their level best, huffed and puffed, made the tackles, a couple of close range tries. But that's Georgia right now.
Italy, everybody keeps talking about how Italy was okay in this tournament. But I want to say that I think Georgia should be given some of the opportunities that Italy has. And that segues into Wales versus Italy. And George, you can follow up here because I know that you have a different feeling as per Italy than I do.
I think Italy have made real progress. That's the point. They're blooded young people. you know, once upon a time, before you were born, Mr. McCarthy, the best team outside the then Five Nations Championship was Romania, because it was Ceausescu's regime. So he had one team was the police, the other team was the army. They were full-time professionals in effect, and Romania would probably have done really well in the Five Nations. Ceausescu goes down, and Romanian rugby goes down with him. What you have in Italy is a country with two teams. I mean, you can't have a country with two teams, but have they made progress, which is all you can talk about? The answer is yes. Wales, on the other hand, have not made progress. And I don't think it's Pivac, the goats. I don't think it's his fault. I just think Wales rugby is in a bad place.
Let's go to something that we can all maybe get a little energetic about, and that's England versus France, Le Crunch. The dramatic final between France and England, particularly in the last 15 minutes, showed what it can actually be. Both coaches anxious on the sidelines, Owen Farrell with a case of the yips, dramatic turns of events, and that unbelievable finish. But really, Steve, it was really surmised well by a quote on Facebook directed at Paul Barford, an Englishman living in the USA, the former head coach of the now defunct Ohio Aviators, but more importantly, the husband to Ann Barford, women's Eagles legend. And here's that quote. Paul, how do you feel about only beating the French third 15 in extra time? Might there be a chink in the tactical armor of the master race? Was Solomon actually wiser than Eddie Jones after all? When will Owen Farrell's secret life as a serial killer be revealed? Is this why Amazon bought the rights to the Frankenstein-esque tournament? Steve, you recognize that quote?
I recognize those words, Your Honor.
Those are your words, and they're very, very apropos, I would say, if you're not an England fan, which is everybody that doesn't live in England.
Right? Yeah, sums up what I think about the tournament. The game, the referee, it is what it is. The only benefit, or the only ray of sunshine we can find, is it was an exciting finish to what has been a less than exciting tournament. So there's that. The Autumn Nation Cup is now over, mercifully, and I'm really not necessarily looking forward to the Six Nations. If I was asked right now, would I renew a subscription? It would be touch and go.
I'm looking for. Of course, you're not looking forward to the Six Nations. It's gonna come on, man. I mean, we gotta look forward to it.
I'm not looking forward to the quality.
What's the alternative?
The alternative is death.
It's not to look forward to it and die in a corner.
Right, but it's 8 weeks away, and so what is going to be different? Right? It doesn't look like we're going to get fans back in any numbers early on.
Well, looking at George right now, George, you don't look enthused. But didn't your man of the match for England, Andrew Brace?
No, hold on. Look, the referee was awful. And the worst thing that can be said about a referee is that he influenced the result. Half the refereeing contingent is handling the game very badly. So this game is rubbish. Get to the Six Nations. My friend's point. Would I renew my subscription if I had a choice between Netflix and the Six Nations? It'd be a tough call.
Because you know damn well you're going to watch the next Six Nations, both of you. You're both.
Hold on. There was a guy 150 years ago changed the game because he picked it up in defiance of the rules of the time. He picked up the ball and ran with it. And thus was born rugby union. Rugby union was meant to be run. It was meant to be passed. It was meant to exploit space and a whole pile of other things, right? Not this awful stuff. And Young's at scrum half, Murray at scrum half, all of them, with the sole exciting exception of the French.
Yes, so I think we should look at this through a socio-political economic lens.
Well, how else would we look at it?
How else? Because initially, in Marx's words, religion was the opium of the masses. Then towards the end of the last century, it became sport. Became
That's a
football.
T-shirt, right?
What is the opium of the masses now? It's Netflix. And if sport is going to compete, it needs to be a lot more exciting, particularly rugby, than what we just saw.
My only disagreement with you would be that it's Amazon Prime that is the opium of the masses, because I'm a company man and they're covering rugby. Before we go, guys, final thoughts on the Autumn Internationals. Anything positive for you two? I know that it's you're having a hard time with it, and I understand. I'm going to come personally give you guys hugs for the level of rugby that was played. It's way beneath you. It was okay for me, but I'm just a dopey Yank. So, final thoughts?
The Autumn Internationals were, because I'm a movie buff, were a trailer. So they're a trailer for the Six Nations. So what you saw in this autumn, you're going to see in the Six Nations, with the possible exception majorly of France, and to a minor degree, in my view, Italy, whose only hope of success is actually running with the ball as opposed to kicking it up in the air. So this is bad news. If the legal situation continues with concussion, if there are no spectators, which is, if not a probability, is a real possibility, with no spectators, the game will then could well implode financially. We are looking at something we have never seen before in this game that we love and adore since we were in nappies.
All right.
I suppose I could be tempted to watch a Six Nations game were we to go to the Pig and Whistle and you were to buy me one of Cormac McCormack's Irish breakfasts.
And that's, my one thing that I lament the most is not being able to watch these matches with you at the Pig and Whistle. But I have a different view of all of the rugby that we've been able to watch. I think it's sustenance for a COVID-starved rugby audience that would watch anything just to have a distraction from all the madness that's around us. And I think Fabien Gauthier has proven that he is the man in terms of being right on it with getting his players blooded, having played down that his team was going to be shitty, and coming out on top. So, or coming out on top if there was proper refereeing. That's my final thought. Oh, okay, go ahead. I'll give you. I know that you want to chomp. Go ahead, Steve.
I like your tie.
Thank you, George. Tie.
No, I think my choice of shirt today indicates my mental state in relation to this great game. It's dirty, it's unpressed, and it's overused, and that's the way the game is.
See, again, our contrast, I think it makes your eyes pop and you look resplendent. That's just me. All right, on that note, I want to thank Mr. George Hook calling in from Dublin and Mr. Stephen Lewis calling in from the bourgeois Upper West Side. I'm Matt McCarthy for Rugby Wrap Up, signing off.